Hello guys, how are you all? இப்போ அடுத்த செக்மெண்ட் வாட் இஃப் செக்மெண்ட். இப்படி ஆச்சுனா என்ன நடக்கும் அப்படின்னு கேட்பாங்க. வாட் இஃப் செக்மெண்ட் அதாவது இவ்வளோலாம் நடந்து சப்போஸ் படத்தை ரிலீஸ் பண்ணணும்னு சொல்லியும் நடக்கலைன்னா என்ன பண்ணுவாங்க, இப்படி நடந்துச்சுன்னா என்ன நடக்கும் அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு ஸ்பெக்குலேட்டிவ் தான். Even with Supreme Court's order to release the film Thug Life in Karnataka, what happens if state government refuses to ensure proper security and ensure law and order of the state? As one person from Rakshana Vedike openly threatened that he will note down which state releases Thug Life and will see what happens on live in NDTV News, leading to some sort of violent incidents, as Karnataka has already took stance on not accepting the Supreme Court's order to release Supreme Court's order to release Kaveri water. What then likely to happen in state of Karnataka? அப்படின்னு சொல்லி கேட்டிருக்கேன். Let's see what GROK tells. Speculative, what if like this happens? இந்த கொஸ்டினுக்கு என்ன சொல்லுதுன்னா, the scenario you have outlined raises critical issues and the enforcement of Supreme Court's orders, the state's responsibility to maintain law and order and potential consequences. சப்போஸ் நான் படித்தது உங்களுக்கு புரியல, பொறுமையாக படிக்கிறேன் கேளுங்க. The scenario you have outlined raises critical issues about the enforcement of the Supreme Court orders, the state's responsibility to maintain law and order, and the potential consequences of non-compliance, especially in light of Karnataka's alleged history of defying Supreme Court directives. Example, the Kaveri water dispute. Below analyze the implications of the Karnataka government's hypothetical refusal to ensure the security for the release of Thug Life, the impact of threats by groups like Karnataka Rakshana Vedike, and the likely outcomes in Karnataka grounded in legal, constitutional, and practical considerations. என்ன நடக்கும்? ஃபஸ்ட்டு லீகல் அண்ட் கான்ஸ்டியூஷனல் ஃப்ரேம்வொர்க். சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட்ஸ் அத்தாரிட்டி. சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் ஆஃப் இந்தியா இஸ் த ஹையஸ்ட் ஜுடிஷியல் அத்தாரிட்டி அண்டர் ஆர்டிகல் 141 of the Constitution, and its orders are binding on all authorities including state governments. Non-compliance with Supreme Court orders constitutes contempt of court under the Contempt of Court Act 1971, which can lead to civil or criminal penalties including imprisonment or fines of for officials. Right? In Thug Life case, Supreme Court's order on June 17, 2025 explicitly directed the Karnataka government to ensure the release of CBFC certificate film and protect against mobs and vigilantes threatening public order. Failure to comply would be a direct affront to this mandate. The court's transfer of petition from Karnataka High Court to itself underscores its intent to closely monitor compliance, with further hearings scheduled for June 19, 2025. State's obligation to maintain law and order. Law and order is a state subject under 7th schedule of the Constitution, list 2, entry 25, making the Karnataka government primary responsible for ensuring security for Thug Life screening and preventing violence. Even though it's a private event, அது ஒரு படம் ப்ரைவேட் ஒரு ஆர்கனைசேஷன் படம் எடுக்குது, ஒரு கம்பெனி படம் எடுக்குது, ரிலீஸ் பண்ணுது, ப்ரைவேட் ஈவெண்ட்டாக இருந்தாலும் Karnataka government is primary responsible for ensuring security for Thug Life screening and preventing violence. Supreme Court has repeatedly held that states cannot abdicate this duty even in the face of protest or threats. In Anil Kumar vs. State of Karnataka 2018 and Prakash Singh vs. Union of India 2006, the court emphasized that the states must act decisively to uphold public safety and constitutional rights, including freedom of expression under Article 19(1)(a). Failure to provide security could violate Article 14, equality before the law, 19(1)(a), freedom of speech, 19(1)(g), right to practice a profession, and 21, right to live and liberty, as highlighted in the Thug Life petition. Contempt for non-compliance. The Karnataka government refuses to ensure security. It risks contempt proceedings in Jal Mafia vs. State of Maharashtra 2017. Supreme Court initiated contempt against officials for failing to implement court orders, demonstrating its willingness to hold state authorities accountable. The court could summon senior officials, example Chief Secretary or Director General of Police, to explain non-compliance, imposes fine, or in extreme cases orders central forces to enforce its directive. Wow. Kaveri water dispute precedent. Karnataka's alleged defiance of Supreme Court order in Kaveri water dispute, example 2016 and 18, sets a troubling precedent. In 2016, the state's refusal to release water to Tamil Nadu led to widespread protest, violence, and contempt petitions. Supreme Court criticized Karnataka's non-compliance, threatened contempt, and deployed central forces to restore order. இவ்வளோ நடந்திருக்கு. Okay. However, the Kaveri case involved complex interstate dynamics and public sentiment, which differ from the Taglev case. The film dispute is more localized, involving a private party, Kamal Hassan's production house, and linguistic pride, making outrage defense less politically viable but still possible if public sentiment escalates. Threats by Karnataka Rakshana Vedike. The reported threat by a Karnataka Rakshana Vedike member on NDTV stating that they would note down which state to release Taglev and will see what happens next constitutes a direct challenge to the rule of law. Such threats could qualify as criminal intimidation under Section 503 IPC or incitement under Section 505 IPC, especially if they lead to violence. Supreme Court's June 17, 2025 order explicitly condemned mobs and vigilantes and directed the state to prevent such actions. Failure to act against these threats would further expose the states to contempt and liability. Hypothetical scenario: state government refuses to ensure security. If the Karnataka government refuses to provide adequate security for Taglev screenings, despite the Supreme Court's order, the violence incidents occur due to threats by the groups like Karnataka Rakshana Vedike. The following outcomes are likely: escalation of violence and public disorder. Wow. Theatre screening Taglev could face vandalism, arson, and protest as threatened by Karnataka Rakshana Vedike. Historical examples like 2018 protest against Padmavat in northern India shows that mob action can disturb screening and endanger public safety if the state police fail to intervene. Limited violence, example isolated attacks on theatres, is more likely than widespread riots, as the issue is confined to linguistic pride rather than broader communal or interstate tensions like the Kaveri dispute. However, even minor incidents could deter theatre owners from screening the film, effectively enforcing the de facto ban the Supreme Court sought to overturn. Public sentiment in Karnataka, already sensitive to the perceived slights against Kannada identity as seen in Karnataka High Court remarks on June 2 to 3, 2025, could fuel the further protest, especially if Hassan's refusal to apologize is framed as defense. Supreme Court's response என்ன பண்ணும்? Contempt proceedings. Supreme Court is likely to initiate suo motu contempt proceedings against Karnataka officials for failing to enforce its June 17, 2025 order. The court could summon the Chief Secretary, Home Secretary, or DGP to explain non-compliance as seen in Kaveri water issue 2016. Deployment of central forces. If the state refuses to act, the Supreme Court could direct the deployment of Central Reserve Police Force (CRPF) or other central forces to protect traitors, as it did in Kaveri dispute and Padmavat case. This would be significant rebuke to the state's authority. நினச்சி பார்க்கவே ஒரு மாதிரி இருக்குது கைஸ். Both shocking and sad. அப்படி இருக்கு. This would be significant rebuke to the state's authority. Stricter directives. The court could issue more detailed orders such as mandating specific security measures. Example, the police department at theatres, or imposing a timeline for complaints with penalties for further delays. Public rebuke. The court's to June 17, 2025 criticism of Karnataka government's flagrant failure to uphold the rule of law suggests it would take a dim view of continued inaction. Justice Beyond and Manmohan could escalate their rhetoric, framing non-compliance as a constitutional crisis. Political administrative fallout. Political pressure. The Karnataka government, likely led by Congress Party in 2025, would face political repercussions. Defying the Supreme Court could alienate moderates and urban voters while emboldening pro-Kannada groups, creating a delicate balancing act. The opposition, example BJP or JDS, could exploit the issue to criticize the government's governance. Administrative accountability. Senior officials could face personal liability, including fines or imprisonment for contempt. The government might attempt to deflect blame by citing public sentiment or logistical challenges. Supreme Court's precedent is similar cases. In similar cases, example Kaveri suggests such issues would be rejected. Public sentiment. Continued defense could deepen linguistic tension, particularly if the issue is framed as Tamil Nadu versus Karnataka conflict, given Hassan's Tamil identity. However, the Supreme Court's emphasis on public debate over mob action could encourage moderate voices to counter extreme rhetoric. Impact on Taglev relief. என்ன சொல்லுது? Theatre owners fearing violence might refuse to screen Taglev despite Supreme Court order, as seen in Padmavat cases where some theatres avoided screening despite court protection. This would effectively nullify the court's directive under central forces are deployed. Kamal Hassan's production house could face financial losses due to reduced screening in Karnataka, a significant market. This could prompt further legal action, such as claim for damages against the state for failing to protect their constitutional rights. Cease previous response and compensation. Long-term consequences: erosion of federal trust. Repeated defense of Supreme Court orders like Kaveri Water Tug Life could strain center-state relations, especially if central government, likely BJP-led to 2025, perceives Karnataka's action as politically motivated. The Union Home Ministry could intervene under Article 355, directing the state to maintain order and law and order. Wow. The Union Home Ministry could intervene under Article 355, directing the state to maintain law and order. Judicial activism. Supreme Court might adopt a more interventionist stance in Karnataka, issuing preemptive orders in future disputes to curb state recalcitrants. This could lead to tensions between judiciary and the state executive. Social polarization. Linguistic pride movements could gain traction, with groups like Karnataka Rakshana Vedike leveraging the issue to mobilize support. However, widespread violence is less likely due to issues limited scope compared to Kaveri. Comparison with Kaveri water dispute. Karnataka's stance in Kaveri water dispute provides context but differs in key ways. Scales and stakes. The Kaveri dispute involved interstate water sharing, affecting millions of farmers and triggering large-scale protests in 2016 to 18. The Taglef issue is narrower, centered on affluent and linguistic sentiment, with less potential for statehood interest. Public support. Defense in Kaveri case was politically popular, as water is a visceral issue. In contrast, defying the Supreme Court over a film could alienate urban and moderate voters who value cultural expression, limiting political cover for the government. Judicial response. In Kaveri case, the Supreme Court used contempt threats and central forces to enforce complaints. Similar approach is likely in Taglef case, but the court's recent criticism of Karnataka's capitulation to extremists suggests a low tolerance for defense. Likely outcomes in Karnataka. என்ன நடக்கும்? Based on above, the following scenarios are probable. Partial complaints with limited violence, most likely. Karnataka government under pressure from Supreme Court in June 19, 2025 hearing provides minimal security to avoid contempt but does not fully suppress protests. Some theaters screen Taglef under police protection while others opt out due to fear. Isolated violent incidents occur, example vandalism at few theaters, but widespread unrest is contained due to issues limited appeal. Karnataka Rakshana Vedike's threats materialize in small-scale disruptions, prompting arrest under IPC provisions. Supreme Court monitors compliance, possibly issues furthering directives or deploying central forces if incidents escalate. Hassan's film sees reduced screening in Karnataka, leading to financial losses, but no state-wide crisis. Outright defense with escalated violence, less likely. The government openly refuses to provide security, citing public sentiment, allows Karnataka Rakshana Vedika to disturb screenings. This leads to significant violence, including arson attacks on theatres, mirroring Batmath protests. Supreme Court initiates contempt proceedings, summons officials and deploys CRPFs to enforce the order. Central government may intervene under Article 355, escalating center-state tensions. Karnataka faces a constitutional crisis with the political fallout for the ruling party and increased polarization over linguistic identity. Hassan's production house pursues damage with a strong legal basis due to state's proven negligence. Full complaints with minimal disruption, least likely. Yeah. The government, fearing contempt, deploys robust security, arrests those issuing threats, example Karnataka Rakshana Vedike members, and ensures smooth screening. Public protests fizzle out due to strong state action and moderate voice privilege. அதாவது இது கூட லெஸ் லைக்லி தான், இது லீஸ்ட் லைக்லி, இது நடக்காதுன்னு சொல்லியிருக்கேன். அவங்க எங்கே கம்ப்ளைண்ட்ஸ்லாம் பண்ண போகிறாங்க. சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் ப்ரைசஸ் கம்ப்ளைண்ட்ஸ் and the issue subsidies without major violence. Hassan's film releases successfully with no significant losses. Potential for compensation revisited. If the state fails to ensure security, leading to violence or financial losses, Kamal Hassan's production house has a stronger case for compensation than outlined in the previous response. Legal basis. The state's refusal to comply with Supreme Court order directly violates Hassan's rights under Article 14, 19(1)A, 19(1)G and 21. Cases like Rudul Shah vs. State of Bihar 1983 and Nilabati Behera vs. State of Orissa 1993 established that the states can be liable for constitutional torts, including failure to protect rights. Quantifying losses. Losses could include lost ticket sales in Karnataka, additional security costs and reputational damage. If theatres refuse screening due to state inaction, the causal link is clear. Likelihood. A compensation claim is more viable in the scenario, especially if the violence occur and the Supreme Court finds the state in contempt. The court could award damages directly or direct Hassan to file a separate suit. Conclusion. If the Karnataka government refuses to ensure security for Taglib despite the Supreme Court's order and violence ensues due to the threats by groups like Karnataka Rakshana Vedike, the state risks contempt proceedings, deployment of central forces, and political fallout. The most likely outcome is partial compliance with limited violence as the government balances public sentiment and judicial pressure. However, Karnataka's history of defying Supreme Court orders in the Kaveri dispute suggests a possibility of greater defiance, though the Tagliv's issue narrower scope makes it less probable. Supreme Court's firm stance on June 17, 2025 and its scheduled hearing on June 19, 2025 indicate close scrutiny. The potential for swift action, example contempt CRPF deployment if the state fails to act. Hassan's production house could pursue competition if losses occur due to state inaction, with a strong legal basis if violence materializes. Karnataka is less likely to see localized disruptions rather than statewide unrest, but the outcome hinges on government's willingness to uphold the rule of law against mob threats. Great. ஸ்பெகுலேட்டிவாக இருந்தாலும் ரொம்ப நல்லா பண்ணியிருக்கு ஆக்சுவலி. குட் யூஸ் ஆஃப் மெமரி. Great. I loved it. So that's it from my end, guys. Hope இது ஒரு நல்ல ஒரு காம்ப்ரஹென்சிவ் வியூ கொடுத்துட்டு நினைக்கிறேன். இட்ஸ் an ongoing issue. நாளைக்கு தான் தெரிய வரும் சுப்ரீம் கோர்ட் என்ன சொல்ல வருதுன்னு. We will follow it through. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like the video if you like the content. Enjoy ஆச்சு பார்க்க நல்லா இருந்துச்சுன்னா லைக் பண்ணுங்கள். And if you want to give some suggestions, உங்கள் ஒப்பீனியன்ஸ் எதாவது இருக்குது, கிரிட்டிசிசம் இருக்குது, சஜஷன்ஸ் இருக்குது, எதாக இருந்தாலும் சரி, மேக் யூஸ் ஆஃப் கமெண்ட் செக்ஷன், let me know. If you want to support me, hit that subscribe button. That's the only way you can support any upcoming YouTubers like me. கூட சீக்கிரம் நல்ல வீடியோ சந்திக்கிறேன். Bye bye. See you all. Peace out.